thrilled to be able to officially open this first international dialogue on the Israel educator. We do have something very, very deep and important in common. We are passionate in our belief that Israel must be an integral part of the development of the Jewish identity of a next generation.
We are sparking the possibilities of the future, and it's really an honor to be partnering and to be a part of all of this.
We first of all need to make sure that our base, which is the Jewish people, wherever they are, understand the importance of having this nation state of the Jewish people here, and you cannot make it happen without proper education.
An important thing about the conference is what it means to bring Jewish educators together from around the world and across Israel in Israel. We can't do anything in Israel education without Israel and Israelis for it to be truly authentic. Israel is what brings us together. Israel is what holds us together.
Sometimes the most powerful thing is the dialogue with other educators, other leaders in the field, and exchanging ideas. Networking is a very, very important piece.
Gaining a new energy for revisioning Israel education.
It's truly cross-sectoral. So we have people here from day schools, we have people here who work on campuses, we have rabbis, people in communities, people from federations, people like myself who work across the sector, academics. There are people here representing all of the major efforts that the Jewish people are currently making to engage young Jews with Israel.
I have a lot of takeaways from the conference. One is relationships. There are people here doing extraordinary work that we want to replicate, and people with whom we want to collaborate. Two, I think there's been a mindset here about thinking differently, about realizing that there might be new ways to consider Israel education, new strategies, new methodologies that really speak to new learners and with it new opportunities for education that arise. And the second is the international nature of this, really understanding Israel and Zionist education as a global phenomenon.
One thing that's been very refreshing about this conference has been that we've celebrated unity without uniformity.
The best part of this conference is that we take these field trips, that we first spend time talking about the theory of Israel education, and then we're out in the field, we're doing experiential education, the things that we actually want to do with our students, we get to become students ourselves. And after the day together, we're able to then unpack and process and decide what we can do when we go back home, and I think that has been one of the most meaningful parts of this program.
There are a few things that we've done together as a group of educators that helped me think in a new way of how I do Israel education on site.
Because you're actually in the place that inspires you, and this is a living memory. It's the past, the present, and the future.
מה שהיה מיוחד בו זה השילוב עם הסיור בשטח. ראינו פרויקטים מדהימים, נופים מדהימים, אנשים מדהימים, בעשייה שלהם ממש, ולא נשארנו רק בכיתה, וזה כל כך לימד.
Looking at places that we've been to before but through a different lens. And I think that's very much what the conference is like, is to really look at Israel education, which we've all been engaged in for many years, but to look at the whole of Israel education through a very different lens.
Having people from all over the world in different backgrounds, religious, not so religious, from the right, from the left, and being able to sit down and just have a straightforward dialogue and talk to each other, and there's nothing we can't discuss. So it's been, very profound and enriching for me.
The seminar is important for me as a Brazilian teacher to share my experience in my field of education with teachers, educators, directors of the whole Jewish world.
Being exposed to people from all over the world, working in so many different organizations.
מכירים הרבה אנשים במקומות שונים, וזה נותן גם הרגשה של עם אחד.
השונות שרואים בחדר של יהודים מכל הזרמים, כל מיני מקומות בעולם, תרבויות שונות, ואנחנו רואים פה את מה שמאחד בינינו יותר ממה שדברים שמפרידים.
We teach generation after generation how to be Jewish, and we didn't take the necessary time and the step back to teach them why.
Trying to create a narrative of Zionism with nuance is incredibly important and will only be more and more important in the days and years to come.
Projects in Tel Aviv which are reinvigorating Jewish life in a secular city of Tel Aviv. And it shows me great hope because, of course, the Jewish community of Hungary is a very assimilated, very secular one. Finally, we see examples how we can bring back our young audience to Judaism, how we can make it accessible for them.
New ways to make Israel more relevant to the Mexican community.
We want our students or our participants to have a deep and meaningful connection and relationship to the state of Israel and its people, and we all get there in different ways.
החשיבות של ארץ ישראל ומדינת ישראל לזהות היהודית זה דבר חיוני.
The passion that I have for Israel, how can I communicate that to others? I'm rethinking how we're going to teach about Israel.
Helping American Jews know Israel's story and know why it's an important component of Jewish identity.
It's so important that you are here tonight. It's so important that we cooperate together. Thank you.
There are many unique opportunities that have been offered to us here with the WZO. We talk about Israel in the abstract often at conferences, but to actually commit to being here makes it not only profound and meaningful, it's authentic.
But the centrality of Israel in everything that we do in terms of our Jewish education and how important Israel is for Jewish continuity. We're all dealing with populations whereby largely our populations are not going to live in Israel. And yet I think we're seeing that Israel is that point of mifgash. It's that central feature which is not only bringing ourselves as educators together, but it also potentially can bring our students together as this unifying force for Jewish peoplehood throughout the world.
שמתי לב ש90% רצו לדבר עברית, וחשוב שאפילו השלטים, שהכל יהיה בעברית, כי עברית זה שפת העם היהודי.
Our main concern at the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs is the relationship between Israel and world Jewry. To understand deeply the perspective of world Jewry, the people that really on the field, how they think about Israel education and the connection to Israel.
I sense that we're truly being asked to be collaborators and partners with Israel in this endeavor to further shape the understanding of the position of Israel in our education programs.
Okay.
We have the ability to ask and to use asking as a method of teaching.
I think the critical thing that I've taken from the seminar is how many new ideas actually exist, new programs, new frameworks in which to really develop the mindset of our students.
To focus on the positive and on the possibilities.
I learned here in this seminar that we have to look for our own tools.
Bring to my home new tools, experience, and possibilities of cooperation among the Jewish communities around the world, and especially with the centrality of Israel.
A much sharper set of tools to analyse the questions which we face locally, and those tools have come not only from just being in an environment with lots of other educators for 4 days, but seeing how other people in other countries and other settings are tackling these questions.
There were many workshops, many discussions, both formal and informal, between sessions, during sessions, which opened the window to explore Israel education from different vantage points. We found it extremely beneficial.
I take a lot of ideas, I take a lot of contact, I take a new way of thinking about Israel.
And how we can infuse a narrative into all of our programs and to our curriculum so that they become part of the story that we're trying to teach.
There's a lot of tools and methods that I learned, and I look forward to implementing them as soon as possible.
Impact.
There's always hope, there's always a future, there's always fun, there's always engagement. And that's really something to take home.
I have the sense that this conference is going to launch a new culture of collaboration and that will have tremendous promise.
I really appreciate how international this conference is. At the end of the day, I'm going to take home a new community of people. I'm going to take home new program ideas and a new pedagogical approach to asking questions and getting participants to think about their relationship to Israel.
I think we should look at each other and just learn from each other. We collaborate, and together we could achieve much more.
There'll be more gatherings like this. It's about young Jewish people all over the world having a chance to connect to Israel. And I have a solid expectation that at least some of the projects we're discussing today will be implemented.
ממש אפשר להרגיש את האנרגיה והעוצמה של האנשים שהשתתפו כאן. הרעיונות היו מדהימים, ההצעות שלהם היו מעולות, ובאמת נראה שיש צורך אמיתי בשטח, ואני רק מחכה לשמוע את ההמשך, את כל התוכניות ההמשך שיצאו מהכנס הזה. אין ספק שהכנס הזה הוא התחלה.
It's an exciting time for Israel education. It's writing a new chapter in the history of Israel education. So it was our privilege to be a part of it. We ignited so many sparks here that the possibilities are well beyond what I can comprehend, but I know and I'm excited to see what they all flourish into.
There was an energy to this conference that grew out of its diversity, and that diversity was very intentional on our part. But what was common to everybody, and it was palpable, was a passion for creating a language for Israel education that would transcend our differences even as we celebrated them. As enriching as the experience was for the people during the 4 days that they came together, there was an orientation throughout to coming away with very practical proposals for next steps to be taken. And that's really our commitment now here within the World Zionist Organization, is to take the ideas, to translate them into very practical proposals. We ended the conference by launching a professional network of Israel educators. What emerged from this conference was an understanding that by continuing to work together, we would really be able to multiply our effectiveness.
Thank you, WZO. Thank you, iCenter. Thank you, Government of Israel.
On behalf of all my colleagues at RAVSOC and perhaps all of my colleagues in North America, we want to thank the WZO and the iCenter and all of those who've collaborated to make this conference possible.